Hi friends, happy to meet you all again on my part 2 lecture video. And today in this part 2 we are going to complete the classification of diseases. So before we move into the classification, it's very important to discuss what we did in part 1. A small gist. So in part 1 we discussed the introduction where we saw what is disease, what is health, the definition of health, and we also saw what are the prerequisites for maintaining good health. So that's what we saw in the part 1. So today in this part 2 we're going to study the classification of diseases. We're going to classify the diseases based on the modes of transmission. Very important. Modes of transmission. So because why, if you see, there are certain diseases which transfer or which transmit from one person to another. There are diseases which use a vehicle. There are diseases which use a vector. So based on that, we're going to classify the diseases, and I hope you will enjoy this video. So on the basis of need, as I already mentioned, you can expect match the following from this chapter. You'll have the causative agent on one side, you'll have the disease on this other side. You have to match with the respective causative agent and the disease. And sometimes you also get diagnostic measures, and you'll have questions like pick the right statement from the options given. So these are the most predominant way of asking questions from this particular chapter. So you can expect about 3 to 4, or sometimes you can expect even 4 to 5 questions from this chapter. So let's not wait, let's get started. Okay, fine. So as I already said, we are going to classify the diseases. So the first thing that we are going to see is disease can be grouped into congenital and acquired. So the other name of congenital is hereditary diseases. Okay, congenital. So you have a clue here, genital, okay, means they are contracted at birth. Okay, they are contracted at birth. So the other name, as I already said, they are hereditary diseases. Example, you have hemophilia. What is hemophilia? Any idea? You've heard about this disease? Hemophilia is actually where the person who's suffering from this particular genetic disorder will have the blood clotting factor at a severely reduced rate. Even a mild injury will subject that person for a great blood loss. Okay, the person will be subjected to a great blood loss. And sickle cell anemia, you know, the shape of the RBC will be changed into a sickle cell shape. So all these diseases are not transmitted from one person to another, but these are hereditary diseases. The generations before, the grandparents, the parents, or they must be somewhere before, they must have got the disease and they're transmitting to their offsprings. Okay, and the next one, if you see, is the transplantal defects. So when I say transplantal defects, suppose if you have anybody who's suffering from any kidney failure or liver failure, they will subject that person for a transplantation, where we will take an organ from the donor and we will give it to the recipient. So this mechanism, I think all of you know. So these transplantal defects are what, if you see, these defects are encountered by the person who's taking it from the donor. If the donor is suffering from, if the donor is suffering from any disease, like you have measles, syphilis, hemolytic disorder, it can be anything what I've mentioned here. So these diseases from the donor have all chances to pass into the recipient, and that's why it is called transplantal defects. The person who gets it from the donor, along with the transplantation technique, there are chances to encounter these diseases as well. That is why the name transplantal defects. Okay, next, if you see, it is acquired diseases. The word itself gives you the meaning, acquired. It is contracted after birth. Okay, acquired diseases are contracted after birth, and this may be due to the factors like, what are the factors which contributed to it? Infection, degeneration, addiction. So when I say addiction, it can be alcohol or drug addiction. Deficiency. So deficiency can be any vitamins or minerals deficiency. Predominantly it will be vitamins. Then you'll have, or it can be the malfunction of the body organs, tissues or cells. So to summarize this particular session, I mean this particular whatever I have taught here, so diseases are grouped into two categories, congenital and acquired. Congenital is contracted at birth, and apart from that you also have transplantal defects, that is any donor has any problem with their body and you don't monitor it. If the patient is not monitored well, you all have chances the recipient to take on the disease from the donor during transplantation process. And the second category that we saw was acquired diseases, and that disease is contracted after birth. And I also gave you factors which contribute to this acquired disease. So some of which I can say is infection, degeneration, malfunctioning of organs or tissues, or it can be addiction or deficiency. Now let's move to the next part here. So here if you see, we are going deep into acquired diseases. Okay, acquired diseases are classified into two types. One is infectious and the other is non-infectious. In the last part where I explained to you about the factors which contribute to this acquired diseases, I said infections. What are the other things that I said? Degeneration. Then you had deficiency. Then you had addiction. And you had malfunctioning. Okay, so these are the 5 things that we saw. Now coming back to this, again, deficiency is said to be non-infectious. Addiction is again non-infectious. So acquired diseases are broadly classified into two types. One is infectious disease and the other is non-infectious diseases. Disease which are easily transmitted from one person to the other, you call it as infectious, or the other name for it is called as communicable diseases. Okay, while the others I told, right, I gave you examples: deficiency, addiction, malfunctioning of an organ, they don't get transferred or transmitted from one person to another. They are self defects, right? Even when you don't intake the intake of vitamins is not correctly maintained by a person, they are subjected to deficiency. There you don't have anybody to transfer the disease from one person to another. So if the others, that is if it is not transmitted from one person to another or something like that, you call that as non-infectious or non-communicable diseases. Okay, next, now we are moving into the infectious and non-infectious diseases. So infectious diseases can either be communicable or non-communicable. The other name given here is contagious or non-contagious. So how do you classify them? How can you say they are contagious? How can you say this is a non-contagious disease? It is based on the basis of mode of transmission. Okay, very important. Okay, so that is what we are going to discuss in this further part 2. So contagious diseases are transmitted through simple direct contact. Okay, for instance, let's take the hot topic that we are all aware of now. It is coronavirus. Now if you take coronavirus, we are all now in extreme lockdown. We are suffering a lot of hurdles because of this disease. Why? If you see, this is a contagious disease and coronavirus is caused by a virus. It's a viral disease. It easily spreads from one person to another. Okay, and it's very contagious. The aerosols from the person who has the disease, either through cough or either through sneezing, or if you touch their materials, or you happen to come in close contact with that person, you happen to get the diseases immediately. So this is one example that I would like to give here. Other than that, you also have other examples like chicken pox. Chicken pox, the person who has chicken pox, you very well know, they'll have boils all over their body, and whenever the boil ruptures, you'll have lesions coming out, and that fluid is very contagious. It happens to spread, and it will cause diseases for the other person who's subjected to that fluid. Next is non-contagious diseases. See, when I say non-contagious, they are not through direct contact. Okay, they do not spread directly, but they require an agent, they require a mediator from their side to transfer that disease, to make the person positive for disease. Okay, they require an agent for transmission. That is, they are spreaded with the help, or they might spread through vectors. Contaminated food and water. If you take, for example, protozoan diseases, the mode of transmission is very often if you see, it would be contaminated food and water. For example, they have given you Anopheles mosquito. Anopheles is a female mosquito. Okay, it's a female mosquito which is responsible for transmitting malaria. Malaria is actually a protozoan disease, and that is caused by the protozoan named as Plasmodium. And you have several species under Plasmodium. Plasmodium is the name of the genera, and species can you have four to five different species which depend upon the area their spreading depends. Now, for example, let's take Plasmodium vivax. You have Plasmodium ovale, Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium malariae. So these are some of the species which come under the genera Plasmodium, and they are responsible for causing malaria. If you look here, this protozoan disease does not get transferred from one person to another by direct contact. There it requires a vector, and that vector is a female mosquito, exclusively female mosquito, which will spread the disease from the infected person to a non-infected person by the bite. Right? Fine. So these diseases are said to be non-contagious. The non-infectious diseases can further be degenerative diseases. So here you have example: degenerative diseases, deficiency diseases, then allergies, abnormal tissue growth, then the diseases caused due hypo or hypersecretion. So when we say it is hormones, so many people suffer from thyroid problem, right? So these are because of the hypo or hypersecretion of the hormones. So these diseases are not contagious. They are said to be meant for a person, and they are dependent upon the self defects of oneself. There you don't have any person to transfer or transmit the diseases. I think so far it went well. Let's move on. So you have a clear chart now to explain you in detail what these diseases are classified exactly into. So we will go one by one. It's not a hurry at all. So if you look here, we'll start from the beginning. So diseases, as we already saw, it is classified into congenital and acquired. So first let's discuss the congenital part. So what did I say the other name for congenital? It is hereditary. Okay, and that is contracted by birth, hence it is called as genetic disorder. Okay, fine. Again, these congenital diseases are of different types. It can be a single cell mutation, or it can be a chromosomal aberration. Now so the title single cell mutation itself tells you a single cell gets mutated. The sudden change, mutation is a sudden change that happens, and it leads the person into abnormalities. Now coming to single cell mutation, they are diseases which are primarily caused by a single gene, and you have several diseases coming under it. We saw hemophilia, where I said the person who is suffering from this particular disorder, the coagulation factor of the blood will be in extreme low level. Even a mild cut will lead a lot of blood loss. Okay, and mostly if you see, it is because of the absence of the factor 8, they say. Okay, and next is, what is albinism? Albinism is termed as, it is in accordance with the melanin production in the body. Okay, so the person who's suffering from albinism, they might have little or they might not have melanin production in their body. So they will experience a lot of abnormalities in the skin. So color blindness, you already know what it is, so I think I don't have to explain much about it. Now coming to the next congenital disease, a very common congenital disease, it is chromosomal aberrations. And here you have some examples like Turner's syndrome, then you have Klinefelter syndrome, Down syndrome. Down syndrome, I think you know what is it. It is the dwarfism, that is a person who is experiencing retarded growth. Okay, so if I say what is chromosomal aberration, chromosomal aberration is also termed as chromosomal mutation, or you can say it is the missing, or it can be the addition of extra gene, or it can be the mismatch of the genes, or it can be the irregular portion of the chromosomal DNA. So why does this occur? I've given you, either it is by increase, either it is by addition, either it is by deletion, or you mismatch the places of the chromosomal DNA. Okay, so you have 4 types of chromosomal aberration. So any idea what they are? So one is deletion, then you have duplication, and then you have translocation. Okay, and the last one is inversion. Okay, always remember these 4 types, they're very important. Okay, I think you're well fine with congenital part. Now next, shifting to acquired diseases. So I told you already, acquired diseases are one that is contracted after birth. It is your environment that you're surviving in, the place that you're residing in, the people that you're moving in with, the personal hygiene, all this talk about the acquired diseases. So they are developed after birth. So again, these acquired diseases are differentiated into communicable and non-communicable. When I say communicable, they are infectious. They get transmitted from one person to another very easily. Non-communicable, they are non-infectious, and they require certain vectors or vehicles for their transmission purpose. Now again, this communicable disease is classified into contagious and non-contagious. Contagious is spread through direct contact, and non-contagious, they spread through vectors, contamination, or other means. Okay, now coming on to this part. Now when I say non-contagious, they are classified into different types. We'll discuss one by one. Let's take degenerative diseases first. So that is due to the malfunctioning of some important organ. Again, it is not transmitted from one person to another. As I already mentioned, the self-defects that one person experiences, mostly it will be, or predominantly it will be non-contagious part. So here if you see, they have given you some examples like epilepsy, heart diseases. They are confined with one person. Okay, epilepsy, to put it in colloquial terms, you can just say fits. Okay, so this is not just because your mother has fits, it doesn't mean that the child who is being with the mother will get the disease. No, they are confined. They are not contagious. Now coming to the deficiency diseases. Now the vital nutrients that are required for the body, especially vitamin A, and when there is no sufficient vitamin A, it leads to night blindness. So these diseases once again are confined to a self, and they are non-contagious. If one person is having in the family, not necessarily the other family members should get it. It's non-contagious. Next, coming to allergies. This is once again it is confined to a person due to the response of immune response towards harmless proteins. Most of the allergies, and the other term, to put it in scientific terms, you call allergy as hypersensitivity. Okay, you call it as hypersensitivity. That is, the own body cells are treated to be foreign, and your own immune cells will start attacking your body cells, and that term is called as hypersensitivity, where your own body cells are targeted to be foreign and the own body cells will start attacking them. That is what is allergies or hypersensitivity. Again, this is not transferred from one person to another. Cancer, and this is once again non-contagious, and that is because of the due to abnormal growth of certain tissues. And when it comes to cancer, you have two types of tumor. One is benign and the other is malignant. Benign should not be a problem because they are the normal tumors that come in your body and they vanish. Malignant is serious because that is called as cancerous tumors. They cannot stop themselves from multiplying. I think you can understand it. The cell differentiates and multiplies very rapidly, and that term you call it as cancer. Next, coming to the mental disorder and addiction, again, that is also non-contagious. Alcohol addiction, drug addiction, they don't get transferred from one person to another. Next is the hormonal disorder, right? Due to the hypo or hypersecretion of hormones. We all know our body is functioning on the basis of the hormones. What are those hormones? They are the signaling system of your body. Yes, for example, let's take the growth hormone. They are secreted for the absolute or the normal growth of a organism. So you have various hormones. So when these hormones go into hypo or hypersecretion, they are termed as disorders in the body. You have medications for that. Once again, these diseases are not contagious, they are non-contagious. I think this map is very clear for you. Okay? Now coming to the modes of transmission, very important part, and go through it very clearly. So for diseases to spread, either it requires a contact, either it requires a vehicle, or it requires a vector. So these are the three modes of transmission that any microorganism predominantly uses. Okay, now coming to the contact transmission. Okay, in this, the transmission of diseases can be by direct contact or by indirect contact by fomites. For example, you have the materials that are used by the infected person and you happen to have an immediate contact with that material, you will contract the disease, like the plates, handkerchiefs, doorknob, etc. Or it can either be because of the droplets while the person sneezes, or if the person is having running nose, or the person might have cough. If he happens to follow a very bad personal hygiene and if he sneezes, publicly, imagine all those droplets will get collected in the air and it gets transferred to another person. Okay, so this is by contact transmission. Next is vehicle transmission. A vehicle is a non-living carrier of an infectious agent. So when the disease transmission is through a vehicle, for example, contaminated water, air and food. I told you, right, predominantly protozoan diseases, they spread easily because of the contaminated food and water. Let me give you an example here. Now if you take, if people are not following the right bathroom habits, and when they're supposed to go out, or those fecal samples, when they get mixed with the lake water or with the river, and when that person who comes and thrives in the river is not following a personal hygiene, if you don't boil the water and drink, or if you use, or while taking bath the person ingests a little of water which is not safe. So these are the modes of transmission that these protozoan diseases gain entry into a person. So vehicle transmission is through a non-living medium, and mostly it is through water, air and food. Okay, the next transmission is the vector transmission. Okay, so as I already said, I think all of you will be familiar what is vector transmission. Now I told you, right, a very good example is malaria, where I said a female Anopheles mosquito is a vector there to transfer a disease called malaria from an infected person to a non-infected person by a simple bite. A vector is a living organism that transmits the disease to the humans. Most of the vectors include arthropods such as ticks, flies, fleas, lice and mosquitoes. So these are the predominant vectors who transfer diseases from an infected to a non-infected. Vector transmission is further divided into mechanical and biological. So what is mechanical? Mechanical vectors are those vectors that transmitted pathogens passively by biting the host feet or the body parts. So unless and until they don't bite, you don't get the transmission. Okay, they require a bite. And when I say biological vectors, they transmit the pathogens actively. Okay, can you see the difference here? Fine. So with this, we complete the classification of diseases part 2. I hope all of you understood whatever has been taught in this part 2. We'll meet in that part 3 of human health and diseases with another set of discussions and definitions to be discussed. Thank you.